So this one's called The Left's Faulty Logic. I'm not a massive believer in this left-wing versus right-wing dichotomies, but what I have noticed is that some common characteristics amongst those who self-identify as left-wing, and most of them are politically correct authoritarians, so they believe that other people are stupid and they can't run their own lives for them, and it would be better if they grabbed hold of the levers of power, or people like them, and ran other people's lives for them, because they would do a better job than those people would do themselves if they were given autonomy. So another thing that I've noticed with these people that identify as being left-wing is they use faulty logic. And a classic example is they conjure up monsters that don't exist and say, well, we had to do this to save you from my imaginary monster that I created. So I first saw this, it really struck me during an assembly when I was a teacher. And it was given by this absolutely odious PC authoritarian. And he was talking about Libya and the NATO bombing campaign that occurred there, and the NATO sanctioned murder of Colonel Gaddafi. You know, you can call that regime change. And this guy was basically, his assembly was saying that it was okay for us to go in and bomb Libya back to the Stone Age, and do a regime change and have this guy murdered in a pretty horrible, brutal fashion. And he basically justified it by coming up with a fairy story, which was, if we hadn't have murdered Gaddafi and done a regime change, Gaddafi would have murdered millions of his own citizens. Now, the problem with this, just on a pure logic, is that we would never know what would have happened if NATO hadn't have murdered Gaddafi. So you can't say that, oh, if we hadn't have murdered him, he would have killed, because who knows what he would have done. In fact, if you actually look at the data, Libya had the highest human development index score in the whole of Africa. Human development is like measuring the quality of life, so it's income per head, life expectancy, and infant mortality. And Libya's figures were off the scale compared to the rest of Africa. So if you actually looked at the objective data, you'd say, well, compared to many other African countries, Libya was actually well run. So for this guy to say, well, we had to take him out and murder him because he would have killed his own citizens, is a classic example of this faulty logic. It's conjuring up a monster, an imaginary monster, and saying, well, we had to do this because of this imaginary monster I created. Of course, this has been used recently with the Divock 91. That was the imaginary monster. So we had to have the lockdowns, and the lockdowns, though people will say, oh, well, you know, it's all very well for you conspiracy theorists to talk about lockdowns and how damaging they were. Yeah, and here's the point. The costs of the lockdown are facts. You know, there were people that off themselves, there were businesses that went bust, there were people that lost their livelihoods, there were kids that had their educations wrecked as a result of these lockdowns. But what these people will say is that, oh, the lockdowns saved millions of lives. Again, this is faulty logic, because we don't know how history would have played out if we hadn't have locked down. And what we must do is to counter these idiots whenever they come up with this faulty logic, just to say to them, look, your logic's faulty. Can you not understand why that's erroneous? Because we don't know what would have happened had we not locked down. So you can't claim that the lockdowns were a success because you've got no comparison. You know, if you could replay time, yes, you could replay one phase of history with the lockdown, then you'd replay the same phase of history without the lockdown, and then you could compare. But we don't have that luxury. Of course, the other classic one was the Britney Spears. You know, this I won't swear, but this GP that I went to school with, you know, I saw him on Twitter like trying to claim that the Britney Spears had saved millions of lives. Well, that's just not true. We don't know that, because we don't know how many people would have died had we not done the Britney Spears. What we do know is the total number of deaths, and the total number of deaths were rather high after the Britney Spears were rolled out. So we can't replay history. That's the point that I'm trying to make, and draw comparisons. So for these people that say we had to take out Gaddafi, we had to take out Saddam, we had to take out Putin, we had to lock you down, we had to, and then they conjure up imaginary monsters. They're using faulty logic and they're trying to con you. And that's basically all that I want to say today. Just one more thing. A lot of the time with these left-wing, let's use the word idiots, because most of them are kind of just indoctrinated. It often runs through families, so they grow up being indoctrinated into just hardcore Marxism by their parents, even though their parents might not know they're Marxists, but they've just bought into these kind of lies that other people's money, a proportion of it belongs to them because they're deserving, and all sorts of stuff like that. But you know, one thing that you can do to actually get through to them, to get them to wake up, is to use their prejudices against them. So talk to them about bloody Tories, you know, because they're in power. They'll fall for it all. You know, Matt Hancock, evil Tories, Boris Johnson, evil Tories. And at least that's how you'll get them to look at what's happened. Because if you don't use that gateway drug, that gateway phrase of bloody Tories, they'll just dismiss it as a conspiracy theory. But they have this kind of irrational, they think that the Tories are actually different from Labour. Yeah. So use that to I think we should use that to our advantage. And when we talk to them, talk about bloody Tories, they did that. And that could be the gateway into some truth. Anyway, that's all I want to say today. So God bless.